Tonight, A&E continues its retrospective of Richard Nixon and John Kennedy, the culmination of their historic race for the presidency. Election night, 1960.
Good evening. This is NBC News Election Central. For several million of us Americans, this is a most extraordinary election. By circumstances which must be obvious, I hereby speak for all those Americans who have adjusted to the immutable fact that come what may tonight, we shall be older than the President of the United States. And for any who might have harbored the so-called father image of the President, the switch to the young brother image may be a shocker. But we suggest you settle down now. Perhaps a pencil and a pad of paper you'll find helpful. You may choose to do a little dial twisting to see how our competitors are doing, but we hope and trust you'll be back. The very first returns are now beginning to pour in substantially, and those in just a moment.
John F. Kennedy, Richard M. Nixon, Campaign 60, the election night, part of A&E's presentation of the closest presidential campaign in modern history.
Hello, I'm John Chancellor. Welcome to Election Night 1960, the last round in the famous battle between John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon for the presidency of the United States. Senator Kennedy, the Democrat, against Vice President Nixon, the Republican. Remarkably young candidates. Nixon was 47, Kennedy 43. A legendary night in American politics, one of the closest elections in history, decided by something like 2 votes per precinct across the country. A real cliffhanger of a story. And welcome to the small screen black and white world of 1960 television. A lot of political coverage looked improvised because it was. In 1960, people were still doing things for the first time on television. NBC News was stretching its wings that year using computers and new tally boards. Let's begin, as our coverage began back then, with Chet Huntley and David Brinkley in Studio 8H in New York City. Election night, 1960.
From NBC News Election Central, Chet Huntley and David Brinkley.
Good evening. We're all here. The returns are beginning to come rather fast, as we promised. So, first of all, let us go to our summary boards, the ones that give you a quick, clear, easy picture of who is ahead and by how much. They're all here in the middle of the room, and that's the picture at this moment of the total popular vote for president, with almost 500,000 votes, almost 1 million votes. The electoral vote, this is what does the electing. It's, the figures are so small at this hour they don't mean very much, but that's how they look.
In another part of the city, the RCA 501 computer is beginning to whir away, digesting these numbers now faster than we can even utter them. So for a report on what the 501 is saying, we go to Richard Harkness.
Well, Chet, I think that tonight I've got perhaps the most exciting assignment of all the NBC News crew, because I'm down in Wall Street in mid-Manhattan with our RCA 501 computer. And very shortly, as soon as about only 1/10 of the total vote is in, we are going to have what we call projections. That is estimates on what the final vote will be in a popular, and then what the final vote will be in the Electoral College. Well, now, here briefly is how that projection it will be made. The RCA 501 computers is connected with a NBC's vote-gathering equipment up there with you in mid-Manhattan. Then, here in Wall Street, the computer takes in vote totals, punches them out on tape. That tape is fed electronically into banks of magnetic tape storage reels. Now, the information can be called up with other information from the electronic console. Now, within the computer, tonight's returns are compared to 200,000 factors of past elections. Studies of, the farm vote, of labor, of religious groups, northern and southern Negroes, to name only a few, which we have stored in the computer's memory, and we've been doing it over the last year. And then some 100,000 equations are made in the twinkling of an electronic eye. Well, here then is I think we could call it a wedding of political science and electronic science. It achieves its projections of election results, which I shall be reporting throughout the evening, by doing some computations, the political equations, and the experts tell me to accomplish these equations humanly would take the work of 60,000 clerks. This is Richard Harkness with the RCA 501 computer.
Senator Kennedy cast his vote today in Boston at a branch public library. Somebody was standing outside holding a sign saying the landslide begins here. So we'll see about the accuracy of that later in the evening. They then left for Hyannisport to wait for the returns, where Mrs. Kennedy said these will be the longest hours of my life. Ray Schurer of NBC News is there with them, so let's switch now to NBC News campaign correspondent Ray Schurer with the Kennedy Party in Hyannisport, Massachusetts.
This building is a National Guard armory. It is about 1.25 miles from the big White House on the water where the senator lives. There are signs all over the wall of this armory saying, "Sleep well tonight, your National Guard is awake." But we would suggest no one in this Kennedy Nerve Center, few people in the land will sleep until after a late hour when the senator will come here, mount the platform behind me, step to the microphone and make either a concession speech or a victory statement. The senator is alone with his wife tonight watching the television results. The family is in Ambassador Kennedy's house next door. We have followed the senator all day, and it went like this. After Mrs. Kennedy was driven to Boston from here, they went to the foot of Beacon Hill in Boston and voted in the basement of a defunct library. It did not seem like an historic occasion. The senator whispered a few words of instructions to his wife. She went into one booth, he into another, and it was all over except for the photographers. We drove from there to the Boston airport. The senator said, "Well, this is it," as he got on the plane. This afternoon, there was a picture-taking session on their lawn with the senator, his wife, Jacqueline, the little Caroline, and a Welsh Terrier named Charlie. The senator was on his dignity. He declined any trick poses for the cameraman, and at one point, when a Boston photographer asked him if he planned to use his home as a summer White House, he said, "I don't even want to talk about that." He was plainly preoccupied. He was fidgety. After 11 months on the go, here was finally a day of repose. And so this afternoon, for the first time in weeks, Senator John F. Kennedy took a nap. He has two speeches in mind for tonight, one if it's yes, the other if it's no. At this hour, he, like you, wonders which one he will give. Ray Schurer, NBC News, with the Kennedy Party in Hyannis, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Ray. Vice President Nixon, on the other hand, cast his vote in Whittier, California today in a private home rented from a chip beef salesman. Then they left and set out for Los Angeles, but he deserted the party and drove away for a while by himself. Tonight he is back in town. Herbert Kaplow of NBC News is there with him, so we switch now to Herb Kaplow with the Nixon Party in Los Angeles, California.
Well, this ballroom, which will be the center of activities more and more as the evening wears on and as more reports come in, as you see, is not quite ready for this historic moment. That's because just a little while ago, the time expired for a sporting goods exhibit. They were sort of nudged out rather quickly, and in came the people to set up the tote board and all the other accessories for this tote board headquarters. Vice President Nixon himself returned to the hotel. He's up in his 5th floor suite. He returned here about 3/4 of an hour ago. He had gone for lunch to Tijuana. Quite a bit of a surprise to us. We had left him right after he had voted in Whittier this morning. He had then switched cars and indicated he was taking a ride just sort of to clear his head. Decided to go all the way 140 miles to Tijuana. As we say, he is now back. Presumably, he is upstairs looking at the first fragmentary returns in so far. The Vice President did so this morning and the last 2 days to be an appreciably more noticeably more relaxed, self-assured, and perhaps a more confident man these last few days and today than he did, say, a week or a week and a half ago. Now, this may be because he feels better. His cold is abated, although Mr. Nixon is also a very tired man, and that's obvious watching him after these weeks and months of hard campaigning. But it may also be that he feels that in these last couple of weeks, the tide has turned in his favor. Now, he's not going to predict that he's going to win this, but he does feel, obviously, from the last week especially, and this conforms with his political philosophy of campaigning. The last week and 2 weeks are decisive. He feels that this last week has been profitable, has been productive. And he has said this morning that he would not concede any state, even Alaska, which is generally put in the Kennedy column. nor would he claim such a state as Maine or Vermont, which is generally given to the Republicans. Herb Kaplow, NBC News at the Nixon headquarters at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
The Connecticut polls are closed at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. That's 45 minutes ago, and the returns are beginning to come in now so rapidly that our victory desk, we'll go into that in some further detail later. Well, it's a desk that decides when there are enough returns in and the figures are one-sided enough to make a judgment that one candidate is won. In Connecticut, it has made the judgment, and Kennedy has been declared the winner.
Might explain a little bit of the machinery here and how it functions and what it's all about. We're working tonight in Studio 8H, renamed Election Central. It's a large, complex setup which was designed to help us perform an essentially simple job, namely to report swiftly and accurately who won. As more returns reach us, you'll see figures changing rapidly on these boards and on these banks behind me. For clarity, we've broken the country apart in 4 quarters. Sander Van Oker will report the results in the East. Frank McGee is going to handle the southern states. John Chancellor will be keeping watch on the middle western states, and Merrill Muller will handle the voting results in the western states. In each of these regional bays, editors are evaluating new figures and placing them on the boards. You see the figures at the same time we do. The regional editors are sending condensed reports to the summary desk. Here the staff is computing election leads and victories and posting the figures on the board. We'll be looking at them with you throughout the night. Now here, as we've pointed out, you'll be able to follow the total popular vote for president as well as the total electoral vote, both leading and concluded or won. The editors at the NBC Victory Desk are following the returns closely, and when it is in their skilled judgment that a race has been decided beyond question, they will command a V be placed beside the winner's name on the board. As David has indicated, 1 V has gone up thus far tonight in the state of Connecticut. It has gone, in our best judgment, to Senator Kennedy. David?
We have about 1.5 million votes tabulated at the moment. We'll come back and get more details on where they're from and whom they're for in a moment.
Election night 1960 continues in a moment here on A&E. Now return to election night 1960.
Early this morning, after most people except maybe night watchmen and cab drivers had gone to bed, the campaign ended with Kennedy in Massachusetts and Nixon in Chicago. Both of them finally got to bed, though perchance not to sleep. It's been one of the most arduous campaigns we have ever had, and Vice President Nixon, when he ended it, was gray with fatigue as he climbed off another airplane at another town to make another speech. He said to a reporter standing there he hoped sometime he would write a book about running for president, and he said the title of it should be The Exquisite Agony. Well, the exquisite agony of campaigning is over, and now for the candidates and all of the people working for them and committed to them, now begins the exquisite agony of waiting to see how it all turned out. We're here to pass along the figures that will tell them how. Suppose we begin now by going down to our eastern section and Sander Van Oker. Sandy?
David, the most important race down here, of course, is the Connecticut race. We assumed that Connecticut would be in first. It was in first, and already the NBC Victory Desk, on the basis of more than 10%, it's 2/3 of the votes in, has awarded the state to Kennedy. It did that, as you remember, about a half an hour ago. In addition, we're told the Hartford Courant, which is the leading newspaper in the state, has awarded the state to Senator Kennedy. It's no surprise that Senator Kennedy won. He was expected to win, but the state leaders like Governor Ribicoff and State Chairman John Bailey were talking in terms of 30, 40, perhaps 50,000 votes. He now looks like he has much more, and it's a very, very great victory for him in the state of Connecticut. For example, he took New Haven, all 33 wards, by 21,042 votes. That's just a few votes shy of the record that President Roosevelt set in 36. President Roosevelt knew he was going to win and went to bed when he heard he carried New Haven by more than 15. He took Hartford by 31,000 votes. That's as much as Governor Ribicoff took it by in 1958, and that was a record. He took Bridgeport by 15,000 votes, whereas in 1956, President Eisenhower took Bridgeport by 15,000 votes. So that's the situation here now in Connecticut. It looks like it's just about wrapped up.
Thank you, Sandy. We're back here once again on the deck of NBC News Election Central, and suppose we direct your attention now to the National Recap Board. First to the national popular vote as it now stands. It's still very close. Kennedy slightly ahead with about 3% of the national vote now counted. To the electoral vote, the one that counts, there you can see the results. Kennedy has won, definitely, 8 electoral votes.
We also have another piece of analysis from our desk over here that is in charge of Richard Scammon, who is perhaps the world's reigning expert on election statistics. He's published several books about them. He says the votes from key barometric precincts, that is, precincts that generally vote the same way the whole country votes, indicate that religion may be playing a bigger part in today's vote, may have played a bigger part in today's vote than we thought it would. Those precincts that were expected to go Democratic are doing so, while those expected to go Republican are doing so, but in both cases, very heavily. So he concludes from that in the Catholic areas appear to be supporting Kennedy much stronger than was expected, and the Protestants are not supporting him as strongly as it might have been expected. We are here in Election Central on the deck. Chet, I've come across a survey made by a newspaper of all the candidates for Congress in its state, and it confirmed what has been apparent to us in Washington for a long time, and it is that we're developing a new breed of politician in this country, possibly by some Darwinian process, but in any case, they're all coming to look alike. And it found that of all the candidates in that state, all were in their early 40s. All of them had military experience. All of them had they had an average of 2.7 children. All lived in the suburbs. All had been to college. They were all lawyers, all earnest and sincere, and none of them had any new ideas. That was the result of the survey in the paper.
Time now, David, for another national summary. The vote has now reached roughly 14 million, which would be about 21% of the national total. In the Electoral College vote, the all-important one, Nixon has won 34 electoral votes. Kennedy has won 46. Nixon leading in states with 136. Kennedy leading in states with 244. On this basis, then, Kennedy would come up with 290. Nixon would end up with 170, which would put Senator Kennedy over.
Senator Lyndon Johnson is in Texas waiting to see how it all turns out. And Robert Abernathy of NBC is there with him. So let's find out what's happening there by switching to Bob Abernathy, NBC News campaign correspondent with the Johnson Party in Austin, Texas. Bob?
Johnson election headquarters here in Austin are slowly filling up with well-wishers. For a while here, the television engineers and the reporters and the telephone men outnumbered the crowd. The Driscoll Hotel in Austin is a triumph of Victorianism, built in the 1880s with a separate entrance for the ladies, to be, in the words of its first owner, the most magnificent hotel south of St. Louis. This is the traditional political headquarters in Austin. Senator and Mrs. Johnson are in a private suite watching the television returns and even getting early Texas reports by walkie-talkie radio. Johnson is carrying his home county, according to these reports, almost 2-1. That county went Republican in both 52 and 56. I'm in a suite here named for a famous Texas governor, Jim Hogg. Of course, Johnson is deeply concerned about the outcome of the national election. He has a definite interest in his own race for the Senate, for which he's a heavy favorite. But almost as much as either of these races, Johnson is watching the role of Texas in the national balloting. Even if the Democratic ticket wins nationally but does not carry Texas, Johnson will be a disappointed man. Texas went Republican in both 1952 and 56. Dallas and Houston are centers of conservatism where the Republicans are strong. So in a presidential race, a heavy vote here can favor the Republicans. Today's vote has been heavy. Johnson has suffered a great deal of abuse from Texans who objected violently sometimes to his taking second place on the Kennedy ticket. He and his wife were even hissed and jostled Friday in Dallas by an ugly crowd of pickets, many of them fashionably dressed young ladies. So if the Democrats carry Texas, the victory for Johnson will be sweet.
We've just been handed the final statistics on Johnson's campaign, of which he's so proud. He made 426 speeches in 40 states. He traveled over 70,000 miles. Bob Abernethy, NBC News, with the Johnson Party in Austin.
This is Bill Ryan, NBC News, at Republican headquarters in Sheraton Park Hotel in Washington, D.C. I've just come down from the suite to be occupied this evening by Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge, the Republican nominee for vice president, and have here in my hand probably one of the most sincere campaign literature pieces to be handed out in the past 2 months. It says, Nixon Lodge for president and vice president, don't be bad. Vote for Nixon Lodge. Its piece of campaign literature was turned out by 7-year-old Dorothy, one of the Lodge grandchildren. She is not here tonight, probably due to her youth. The other 2 young ladies who are Ambassador Lodge's grandchildren, Emily 9 and Nancy 10, are upstairs on the 7th floor of this hotel with their mother, Nancy Lodge, and their father, George Lodge. They're waiting for the returns, as is the ambassador. I don't know who will be the more excited. Cabot Lodge is not a man to express himself emotionally when something happens, be it good or bad. I'm sure the 2 young ladies who are up there, the 2 grandchildren of the ambassador, will be very excited and very pleased if the result is favorable. I'm sure they'll be quite excited and very displeased if it's unfavorable. Bill Ryan, NBC News, with Ambassador Lodge's party at the Hotel Sheraton in Washington, D.C.
35% of the total national vote is now in, so let's take a look at the recap boards. Popular vote first. Nixon, 11.5 million. Kennedy, virtually 13 million. Might hang on there a minute and see what the Kennedy. The electoral vote, the all-important column. Nixon has picked up 75 electoral votes, Kennedy 148. Nixon is leading in states with 95, Kennedy leading in states with 199. If things continue in this direction, Kennedy will come out tomorrow morning with 347 total electoral votes, Nixon with 170.
Senator Kennedy and his family are tonight at Hyannisport, which is the Kennedy summer manse. Well, the summer is gone, they're there, getting the election returns. Ray Schurer is there with them, so let's go to Hyannisport now and see what's happening there. To Ray Schurer with the Kennedy Party in Hyannisport, Massachusetts.
Sitting here at Kennedy News Headquarters in Hyannis is a kind of gathering elation. Pierre Salinger, news secretary for the senator, puts it this way: the returns continue to be very encouraging from almost all over. Earlier, we had word that the senator had labeled the big Democratic sweep in Connecticut as fantastic. His sister, Mrs. Sargent Shriver, had described him as jumping with joy. What supports all this joy are the various reports from bellwether districts across the nation which are being phoned into the Kennedy command post in Brother Roberts' house next to the senator. One precinct after another is coming in strongly for Kennedy. Districts that Mr. Stevenson either carried narrowly in 1956 or that Mr. Eisenhower had won. It is too early here to claim anything, but the time is not far off when one of the senator's various political strategists will be coming here to make all this optimism a little bit more tangible. Ray Schurer, NBC News, with the Kennedy campaign in Hyannis.
Herb Klein is Vice President Nixon's press secretary, and before talking to Herb Klein, I think we ought to have one courtesy announcement. Vice President Nixon has made a couple of hundred speeches during this campaign, and Herb Klein has the laryngitis. Herb, how does the Vice President see the results the returns up to this point?
First, Herb, I ought to say that part of my job is to be the one with the hoarse voice. Seriously, he's watching the results very calmly and taking reports mainly from our own staff people. He feels that it's a little too early to tell exactly what is going to happen in this election, that it'll probably be a real cliffhanger going on a long time.
Are there some of the states that have been reported so far where you are trailing in places where you thought you were going to go ahead?
I think we're trailing in some where we may still go ahead because you're getting the big city vote first, and we'll pick up a lot of votes in the upstate areas. For example, in Illinois is a good example. In New Jersey, we're doing quite well, I think.
What about Pennsylvania and Texas, South Carolina, North Carolina? These were states you thought your chances were pretty good.
Pennsylvania is a real tough one, and I think the results are yet to be known on that, although they did pile up a good majority in Philadelphia. Texas is very close. I feel confident we will win Texas. South Carolina was always one of the iffy states, which we did hope to win, but apparently we are trailing to a point where we will not now. We'll win some that we had not expected to, and we'll probably drop a few. So it's, as I said, elections so far, the results are coming from the big cities in the east. We'll do better as we move west.
Herb, what's the vice president doing now?
He's very quietly sitting in his room, analyzing the results and just being quite relaxed, as a matter of fact.
And are there other members of his family with him?
He's been talking some with Mrs. Nixon, and the girls have been sort of staying away from it. They're keeping them quiet.
When do you expect to be able to reach some definitive conclusion?
It's hard to tell in this election, Herbie. I don't think I'd want to predict.
Thank you very much. We've been talking with Herb Klein, who is Vice President Nixon's press secretary. Herb Kaplow at the Nixon headquarters at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
From Chicago, NBC reporter Frank Jordan reports as follows. Nobody will ever know how many votes Kennedy got in the 35th Ward, 62nd Precinct, because when they opened the voting machine and looked at the little dials in the back, the one for Kennedy read 000, some kind of mechanical failure, and the election board says there's nothing that can be done about it. There is, however, something we can do about the 501. We can go down to Lower Manhattan and see what it says. Richard Harkness is there taking care of it. Richard?
Well, gentlemen, I think that NBC and RCA can report a truly amazing electronic coup. Now, by that, I mean this. At 8:24 this evening, Eastern Time, of course, the RCA 501 computer, reported by NBC, made its first projection of what the popular vote would be when all of it was counted. The computer estimated at that time that Nixon would lose the election with 48.9% of the popular vote. Senator Kennedy would win with 51.1%. Well, now we are at about 11:20 Eastern Standard Time, and the computer shows that the projected popular vote is precisely what it projected or estimated 3 hours ago, 48.9 for the Republican, 51.1% for the Democrat, and a Kennedy victory. Gentlemen, let me tell you this, if they ever teach this machine to talk, you and I, well, we're out of business. This is Richard Harkness with the RCA 501 computer.
In 1964, we may have two machines at this desk, kicking each other under the desk.
Rich is always a pleasant fellow, isn't he?
The one other thing about the 501, this is a statement of fact, it is the only computer on the air tonight, and there are lots of them on the air, as everyone is aware. This is the only one that has not at any time predicted Nixon would win. The others did.
Good evening again. A clear pattern is beginning to develop out of these millions of returns now coming into Election Central here in NBC Studio 8H. And it's the big city versus the rural areas. The big city returns show the pattern. Boston, Kennedy's hometown, has gone more than 3-1 for Kennedy. Philadelphia, which gave Stevenson 57% of its vote in 1956, has given Kennedy 67% this time around. St. Louis carries the pattern westward. It gave 60% of its vote to Stevenson last time. Now it's giving 67% of its vote to Kennedy. New Orleans, which gave 57% of its vote to President Eisenhower in 56, is giving 66% of its vote to Kennedy. New York, with 2/3 of its precincts reporting, gives Kennedy 63% of its votes. Stevenson got 51%. Chicago, with more than 2/3 of its precincts reporting, is giving Kennedy 67% of its votes. President Eisenhower got 51% of Chicago's votes 4 years ago. And by the way, we learned earlier this evening that an old friend, a splendid colleague, and certainly a great competitor, Ed Murrow of CBS, was taken ill with pneumonia today. We're genuinely sorry to hear it, and we hope he's back soon. David?
Here's a look. Chet has told you how the big cities have been voting. Well, here's a look at the result of both big city, rural, small town, all the voting, and the popular vote for president. We have now about 60% of the vote, and again, this is remarkably fast to have that many this early at 12:30 New York time. Nixon, 18,599,000. Kennedy, 20,191,000. Here's how it runs in the electoral college, the electoral votes, Nixon has won or is leading in states having 191, which is not enough. Kennedy has won or is leading in states having 338, which is enough. If it continues, if it holds as it is now, Kennedy is well in the lead toward being elected the next president of the United States.
We observed a minute ago that Vice President Nixon was in the process this evening of picking up the states with the smaller electoral votes, while Senator Kennedy is capturing those states with the large electoral votes. Well, this points to the significance of the 12 key states which we picked out earlier last week with the intent of keeping track of them to see what they would do, because they represent about 60% of the total popular vote and about 52% of the electoral college vote. So again, let's take a rundown now and see what those 12 states have done or are in the process of doing. We start in the east with Massachusetts. With 16 electoral votes, Kennedy has them. New York, 45 electoral votes, Kennedy has them. New Jersey, with 90% of the vote in, 16 electoral votes, Kennedy has them. Pennsylvania, 80% of the vote counted, 32 big electoral votes, Kennedy has them. Texas, 40% of the vote counted, 24 electoral votes, Kennedy has them. A margin of 47,000. Ohio, 60% of the vote in, and 25 big electoral votes, and Nixon has those. Michigan, 40% of the vote counted. It is still undecided. Kennedy is leading by about 132,000. Indiana, 66% of the vote counted. Nixon has them. Illinois, 50% of the vote counted. Kennedy with about a 300,000 vote lead at the moment. 27 electoral votes. Wisconsin, 80% of the vote counted. 12 electoral votes. Nixon is leading at the moment by about 36,000 votes. In Missouri, 13 electoral votes. The vote is virtually all counted, and Kennedy has them. California, only 20% of the vote in. 32 big electoral votes. Kennedy has a lead of only about 16,000 votes at this moment. And that's the way the 12 states look. David, for the summary.
Here's a summary of 12. Kennedy is leading in 9, Nixon in 3. And in these states, Nixon has won or is winning 50 electoral votes. Kennedy has won or is winning 225.
Herb Kaplow, NBC News campaign and election reporter, is with the Nixon party at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Let's go out there to hear from him.
There is still a buzz of voices and noise, of course, here in the casino ballroom, but not very much of an attempt to generate much optimism here any longer. Most of the people here seem to know that their candidate is not doing very well. They've been following the scoreboard, occasionally getting little encouragement, but this board actually is probably an hour or an hour and a half behind the reports which are being given out on radio and television. Upstairs, where the vice president is, where members of his staff are, it's relatively quiet. There are quite a few security people around the vice president's 5th floor suite. He, incidentally, is expected down here perhaps sometime within the next hour.
Our tote board now shows Kennedy ahead still, as he has been, but by 1 million out of 51 million votes cast. We've heard a great deal. We've heard many forecasts of a close election, when in fact we have had very few close elections. I think 3 in the history of the country. The last one in 48, Truman. Before that, 1916, when Woodrow Wilson won, and the last one before that, or the only one before that, 1876, with Hayes and Tilden, which we do not propose to go into here now. But we may be having another close election, if not that close, pretty close here tonight. Chet?
Well, let's run down both the popular vote again and the electoral vote. The separation between the two candidates now is 1,100,000. Senator Kennedy's lead has been dwindling there just a little bit. Nothing dramatic. But Vice President Nixon has been whittling away at it. Here come some changes. Let's see what this reveals. 25,500,000 for Nixon. 26,676,000. No substantial change. On the electoral vote column, now again, these states, these numbers here, are put there by our best judgment, which so far this evening, in all humility, has turned out pretty good. Nixon has won 166 electoral votes and Kennedy 265. Kennedy needs 5 more to go over the top, or 4 more to go over the top at 269.
The 501 figure, the last one we have, it's now about 10 minutes old. It puts him out pretty fast. Projects the popular vote for president like this: 51.2% for Kennedy, 48.8% for Nixon, which I believe is the same thing it's been saying all night. The electoral vote it projects as 345 for Kennedy, which would give him the victory, of course, and 192 for Nixon. The odds, it figures, I didn't know electronic computers figured odds, did you?
No,
I've never heard that before.
No, that was new to me tonight.
We may be able to find some other kind of work for the 501 when the election is over. At any rate, it figures now the odds are 333 to 1, which is as high as it can go, that Kennedy will win. It says there are only 5 doubtful states now: Nevada, New Mexico, Washington, Illinois, and Minnesota. And we already knew that.
The recap there of the popular vote still shows Senator Kennedy with a 1,100,000 advantage over his opposition. By the way, David, did you know that today there were, almost 70 million Australian ballots cast here in the United States? We'll get to the Australian ballot later. We understand that Herb Kaplow at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles now wants control back once again. You, Herbert Kaplow.
The Vice President and Mrs. Nixon are just now coming out onto the fire escape and making their way down the stairs. We're coming right down. Making their way down now to the ballroom. Followed by campaign director Bob Finch. Now making his way through the press room, which runs parallel to the ballroom. A few people in the ballroom door exit. And now walking through the press room, the Vice President, Mrs. Nixon, wearing smiles. Vice President in a dark blue suit. Mrs. Nixon in a green flower dress. In a moment, they are now about to enter the ballroom and are entering now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, I thought I was going to say that I thought we'd had the last rally of the campaign, but here we go again. As all of you in this room know, and as all of you millions who are listening on television and radio realize, it is normally the custom for a candidate for the presidency or for any other office not to appear until after the decision is definitely known and all the votes are counted beyond doubt. However, I have been keeping some pretty late hours recently, and as some of you have, I know, who have met me at the airports as I've come in with Pat on occasion, I know, too, that many who are listening in the eastern part of the United States will find that it is now about 3:15 in the morning. And before the evening was over, I did want to have the opportunity to speak to those in this room who have been with us during the day, and also to those who are listening on television, to say these things. First, to express to all of you who have done so much in this campaign our appreciation. Words are really inadequate at times like this. We can only try to let you feel what we have in our hearts. And I can say, I can say that we've never had couldn't have had a more wonderful group of people in all of the 50 states than have been in our campaign. And then too, The other thing I wish to do is this. I am sure that many are listening here who are supporting Mr. Senator Kennedy. I know, too, that he probably is listening to this program. And while the... As I look at the board here, while there are still some results still to come in, if the present trend continues, if Mr. Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, will be the next president of the United States. And I want to say that one of the great features of America is that we have political contests, that they are very hard fought, as this one is hard fought. And once the decision is made, we unite behind the man who is elected. I want all of you to know. I want Senator Kennedy to know, and I want all of you to know that certainly if this trend does continue and he does become our next president, that he will have my wholehearted support and yours too. My friends, with that, I want to say again my deep thanks to all of you who are here, to those who have listened on television and radio, and again, my congratulations to Senator Kennedy for his fine race in this campaign, and to all of you. I am sure his supporters are just as enthusiastic as you are for me, and I thank you for that. And while because of interruptions, which I understand, I have not been able perhaps to make this as coherent a statement as I might have wanted to, I do want to say that having been to all of the 50 states of this nation since the nominating convention in Chicago, having seen the American people, seen them by the hundreds of thousands and perhaps the millions in the towns and cities of America, that I have great faith about the future of this country. I have great faith that our people, Republicans, Democrats alike, will unite behind our next president in seeing that America, that they will unite behind our next president in seeing that America does meet the challenge which destiny has placed upon us. And that challenge is to give the leadership to the whole world, which will produce a world in which all men can have what we have in the United States: freedom, independence, the right to live in peace with our neighbors. And so with that, may I say again my thanks to you. Having had only 2 hours sleep last night and 2 hours sleep the night before, I'm now going to bed, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
I don't know whether that was a concession or not. Do you,
I
Dave?
suppose it was a concession, but I never heard one just like it before. What he said, well, everyone heard what he said. If the trends continue, Kennedy is the next president. It was the time for a concession or something, and I assume that was it. But you can choose your own name for it.
By the way, we might take a look now to see what that trend is. The vice president said if the trend continues, so let's check in and see what it is. Now, Senator Kennedy's lead is approximately 1 million even.
What was the senator's mood when you left him?
Well, I think he was hopeful. He was extremely relaxed, and when I last talked to him, he was heading towards his house to go to bed, get some sleep.
Where does the thing stand now? What do you expect him to do next?
Well, we're going to wait to hear further word from Vice President Nixon, and as we announced a little while ago, the Senator will make a statement when he hears further from the Vice President, but no earlier than 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time.
Well, suppose he has heard nothing from Mr. Nixon by 10 o'clock, which is, 7 o'clock on the coast. Suppose Mr. Nixon's still in bed.
Well, all we've said is that the earliest he'll make the statement is 10 o'clock, and we'll be, if it's later, it'll be later.
And you'll just wait. To clear up one point that's become not an enigma, but it's somewhat puzzling. If Mr. Nixon had made a full-fledged 14-carat concession statement, would the senator then have come here and made a victory statement?
Well, I think that would have been likely, yes.
But inasmuch as he didn't, he thought it was best to...
Well, I don't think that the Vice President's statement was a concession, and so the senator felt that the best thing for him to do is get a...
There was too much of an if in it for you.
Yes.
Do you think you have won this election?
I think we'll let the senator make the statement.
This press secretary isn't going to make any until he makes it.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
Right, thanks.
Get some sleep. And we're going to try to do likewise. That was Pierre Salinger, Mr. Kennedy's news secretary. It's very late here. That's all from us. Ray Scherer, NBC News in Hyannis.
Back again on NBC News, Election Central. We go now down to Austin, Texas for an interview with Senator Lyndon Johnson on television tape.
I'm very proud of the manner in which the Democratic campaign has been conducted, in which the people have reacted, particularly in my state and in the entire South and in the many states that I've visited. I feel very confident, and I think when you complete the counting that all America will be proud, and I think we have much to be proud of. I think this is one of America's finest hours.
Were there any big surprises in the voting for you?
No, I think that we still have some states that are uncertain, but I have my views about those. I don't expect to get into any state-by-state breakdown. I'll just watch for the television as you do, and as the counting continues, I'll be interested and calm and confident.
Would you go far enough to say you think you've won the vice presidency?
No, I've told you what I'm going to say about that.
Are you hungry, Senator? Is that why you're going to dinner?
Yes, I'm going out and get some scrambled eggs, a glass of milk, and come back and watch you some more, Nancy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Johnson.
We're trying to settle here so far without any success, or without enough success, one of the closest elections in the history of the United States. One reason it has taken so long is that California stopped counting the votes. We are now, haven't had any new returns from California in some time, but we're trying to make some arrangements to get some. In the meantime, we are still hanging here with Kennedy, one vote short of enough to, one electoral vote short of enough to win, and the states where he might get the one electoral vote are very slow in reporting their return. So it's 6 a.m. in New York. Only the 501 is showing no sign of wear and tear, and I don't know how long we'll be here. Nobody's told us yet. Kent?
Something maybe important has just happened in Illinois. The figures suddenly changed, and now with over 90% of the vote in Illinois, Senator Kennedy is revealing just a little bit more strength than he was a few moments ago. He now has a lead over Vice President Nixon of 38,000 votes. So that edge is wearing pretty well, and it hasn't gone below 25,000, and now jumps back up to about 38.
It's sunrise in the east, for those of you who are in the west where it is still dark. Sunrise here. By the way, the NBC Victory Desk has, well, there it is. There's Washington, D.C. Dawn. Isn't that lovely?
Ray Shearer, NBC's campaign and election reporter, is now standing by at Hyannis, Massachusetts, which is about 5 miles away from Senator Kennedy's home in Hyannisport. And let's see if we can bring Ray Shearer into this circuit. Yes, there he is. How are you, Ray?
I just wanted to prove that I can stay up as late as you could.
Ray, it looks as if you're about to make a speech, are you?
Well, this was Mayor Mr. Kennedy who was supposed to make his speech. This is the platform. This is the podium. These are the flags. The question is now, when will he make it, or maybe will he make it? The latest we get is that it will be no earlier than 10 o'clock. He's still waiting for word from Mr. Kennedy.
Is there anyone around whatsoever?
Is there anybody around?
Yes.
Well, let me see. The Chicago Daily News is here. The New York Post is here. CBS is here. There's some Yale boys here. There's a cameraman behind the camera that's putting me on the air. There are a couple of Western Union men. There's one policeman at the door. At the height of this thing last night, we had a whole regiment of cops here. We're really down to what I'd call the nubbin. How you fellas feeling?
Well, I'm pretty tired. How are you?
We're just spry as an orchid.
We're getting a little numb.
The sun is up. I can see it from here. As a matter of fact, those big spots you see on the curtain behind me are sunshine coming in the windows. It looks like a very nice day in Hyannis. It's like a good day for a little touch football game with the Kennedys.
Gee, it certainly does. It looked a little foggy over Washington a few minutes ago. We had a picture from there.
Oh, it's nice here.
Is Senator Kennedy asleep, do you know? Anybody
He's asleep, Dave. He's going to rise at 9:15. He got in the sack about 4:30. That'll give him about 5 hours. And he's going to check first thing to see if there has been any word from Mr. Nixon, and it may be there won't, in which case you fellas will have to stay on the air all day.
Fine, Ray. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back from time to time until this thing is settled.
Election night, 1960.
Good morning. For a few people, good morning, I say, for a few people who are astounded by what's going on in 8H as you are. My name's Garraway. His name's Blair.
Thank you,
His name's Cooley. And we do a show called Today, which usually begins at this time, but we've been watching Chet and David, and we would no more think of taking over from them than we would of draining the Mississippi River dry this morning. Gentlemen, after 12 hours coming up, I just want to take time to, from the bottom of my feet, congratulate you on the most exciting and accurate television job I have ever seen.
Thank you very much. But if you've been watching us all night, how come you look so fresh?
It's easy to watch.
Have you really been up all night watching this?
Sure. Why not?
On your own time?
Will you go ahead and just continue as you are, and we'll sit back, and today will come along.
Can we try to fill you in on what has happened here in those days?
Sure.
Well, it started out like a house afire last night. The East going very well for Kennedy. The South, surprisingly, gave Kennedy a lot of strength. Then we got to the Midwest. Some races were close. He did very well in Chicago, piled up a tremendous lead. He started to take Michigan. Those were his two best races. He took Missouri. Then it went along and things slowed down, and finally it just ground to a screeching halt. Now in Illinois, we've been watching that all night. That tremendous lead he piled up in Chicago is being whittled down in the southern part of the state. He's still stubbornly holding on to a 34,000 vote lead at this moment with 90% of the votes in. California stopped counting its ballots. Everybody went home and went to bed. We're just beginning to get a few more returns there. I think that also happened in New Mexico, a couple of other crucial states out there. So we're hoping that they'll start counting ballots again pretty soon in Alameda County, Los Angeles, and so on. We'll get this thing resolved.
So it's not fair to say it's decided in any sense?
No, it's not officially decided at all. However, Senator Kennedy certainly, as our computer, our RCA 501 computer says, there's about a 300-to-1 chance in favor of Senator Kennedy.
You hear that, Jack?
Yes, I'm the odd man here.
Carry on, gentlemen. Thank you.
David?
Welcome to our guests, and while they're here with us, we're going to take a quick rundown on our summary boards up in the middle of the studio. And they now show Nixon to have 29,251,000. Kennedy, 30,019,000. Very close still.
A new figure has appeared on the California board. This could be critical. A little over 60% of the vote is now in. Apparently they're counting ballots now and reporting the new figures. And Kennedy is up to his biggest lead that he's had all night since we started to get figures from California, a lead of about 109,000 votes. He's very gradually and very, very slowly pulling away in the state of California. And as, of course, as David has explained, on the basis of our best judgment, he just needs 5 more electoral votes to go over the top. To the boards, did you say, David?
Yeah, I think that's the next.
Let's start the roll call of the states and see how they're doing one by one. And again, we'll start with the East and Sander Van Oker.
Chet, it's the same here in the East as it's been since about 1 o'clock this morning. It's the solid East for Senator Kennedy. Nixon took only 3 states with a total of 12 electoral votes. Kennedy has taken 8 states with a total of 133 electoral votes. And this is how the states broke down. Nixon took Maine. He was expected to. He also took New Hampshire. However, Kennedy was ahead earlier in the evening, but Nixon overtook him, and he took the state as expected. Also in Vermont, with 3 electoral votes, Nixon took that state. That was no surprise. Massachusetts, Kennedy's home state, with 16 electoral votes, Kennedy took that state by about a half a million. That was expected. Connecticut went very early, as you'll remember, in the evening, and it went very big for Kennedy. He was surprised at his margin there. Rhode Island, he was expected to take it, and he did handily. New York State, 45 electoral votes. Kennedy took that by a pretty good margin, but not as great as everyone expected. New Jersey was the real surprise. This was the state the pollsters put down solidly in the Democratic column. Kennedy took it by a very, very slight margin. Pennsylvania was, I think, his handsomest victory in the East. He took that state by 129,000 votes. He can thank the Philadelphia Democratic Organization, which gave him a 326,000 plurality in the city that is far, far greater than anyone, including Franklin D. Roosevelt, ever got. That in Delaware was a Kennedy victory by a slight margin. In Maryland, he also took it by a good margin. So again, to repeat, he has 133 electoral votes in the East. Nixon has 12 electoral votes. Now for a look at the South, over to Frank McGee.
Well, the South was the first area to be completely locked up last night. Nixon did not make the inroads in the South that President Eisenhower did 4 years ago. Religion was not the factor in the South that some thought it might be. It went like this. West Virginia went Democratic, changing over from Republican. Kentucky went Republican again. Tennessee went Republican again. Arkansas remained Democratic. Texas switched from Republican back to Democratic. Louisiana switched from Republican back to Democratic. Mississippi provided a question mark that still might prove of considerable importance. Elected 8 unpledged electors. Alabama remained Democratic. Florida remained Republican. Georgia remained Democratic. South Carolina went Democratic. They had felt sure it would go Republican. North Carolina, considered doubtful, went Democratic. Virginia, considered Republican, proved to be Republican. As it stood, when the final tally was made, Kennedy had a victor's grip on 95 electoral votes in the South. Nixon 43, 8 unpledged. The Midwest, John Chancellor.
The Middle West this morning is a story of some Nixon victories and 2 of the closest presidential contests we've seen unfold in many years. Let's have a look at the board. In Ohio, the failure of the Democratic organization in the cities, plus a large, enthusiastic Republican farm vote, gave the state to Nixon. In Michigan, taken by Kennedy despite a lower-than-expected city Democratic vote. Indiana, a big rural vote, put Nixon in, as you can see. In Illinois, still unfinished. Kennedy ahead 34,000, 850 precincts in Illinois still out, 400 of them in Cook County, a half in Chicago and 1/2 in the suburbs. Very interesting fact that Frank Jordan and our counters in Chicago have been up all night and are still up. In Wisconsin, taken by Nixon with the help of Henry Cabot Lodge. Minnesota, the other seesaw, seesawing all night. The Democrats in St. Paul did their best, but the outstate vote cut down the lead. Now, 19,000 ahead for Kennedy, very small. Iowa, 2 Nixon and a Republican sweep. Missouri, a big Democratic sweep in that state. They'll talk about that one for a long time. In North Dakota, the polls said 2-1 for Nixon. It's something less, but religion obviously not a factor. South Dakota, again a prediction of 2-1, again less. Nebraska's traditional republicanism asserting itself. Kansas, more of the same, a Republican sweep. Oklahoma, the polls said Nixon as strong as Eisenhower. He ran more strongly. So, in 9 states in the Middle West, Nixon has won 90 electoral votes. In 2 states, Kennedy has won 33. He's leading in 2 more states with 38, but a vital and elusive 38 electoral votes that haven't come in yet. That's the story in the Middle West. For the West, here is Merrill Muller.
The most impressive point to make about the West is that the Republicans, Nixon in particular, just about upset all the experts and nearly carried all of the West. He's got 10 states in his pocket against 3 for Kennedy, but on the Electoral College count, it is 47-38. And here's a late report from California. NBC correspondent John Thompson says that by the predictions now, Kennedy should carry California by a margin of about 100,000 votes. Well, that will be the answer if that's it. Let's take a look, however, at the entire Western state presidential sweep. Montana, 4 electoral votes. We've been arguing with our victory desk about that V all evening. David and I finally won the V. It goes to Nixon. Wyoming, with 3 electoral votes, it goes to Nixon. Colorado with 6, this goes to Nixon very comfortably. And New Mexico with 4 is still a toss-up, and notice it is still only 2,000 votes spread out of 230-odd thousand. That state has been seesawing that way for several hours. Arizona went to Nixon very early in the evening, at least early by our time now, and Utah went to Nixon quite a few hours ago. Idaho went to Nixon quite a few hours ago. In Nevada, this is one of Kennedy's victories in the West, and one of the few of them. And in California, we just gave you the report, but here are the figures that we have at the moment. You'll notice that Kennedy's spread in California is now the highest figure he has had all night. It's 111,000 out of almost 3 million votes. In Oregon, this went to Nixon just about an hour ago. And again, in Washington, this one went to Nixon just a little while ago, I think less than an hour ago. Now, here's a big surprise coming up in Alaska. Notice the count there. They are separated by only 500 votes, with half the precincts reporting. This was supposed to have been a Kennedy stronghold, but it looks like Mr. Nixon's visit to Alaska just before the end of the campaign really paid off there. He's pretty close to overtaking Kennedy in a strong point. And of course, within the past 40 minutes, Hawaii went to the Nixon column, and that's the wrap-up in the far west. Let's go back to Chet and David.
The only member of our rapidly growing staff here, except for the 3 today people who have just arrived who was not tired, is the 501 computer, the RCA 501, which is in Lower Manhattan and has been doing an excellent job all night. Its trainer and keeper, as we have described him before, Richard Harkness, is there. Richard, come in and tell us what it says, will you?
Well, David, I'm about convinced that I can wear out the computer. All night long, the RCA 501 computer has been making its electronic equations and projections. And although the official result is stalled with Senator Kennedy lacking those 5 electoral votes, well, the computer projects what the final result will actually be in the Electoral College. Now, at this hour, the projected electoral votes stand at Nixon 213, Kennedy 316. That's without those 8 Mississippi votes. So the computer estimates and insists that its estimate is correct, that the odds are 331 that Senator Kennedy will be our next president. Those, incidentally, are the maximum odds that the machine can give us. The popular vote projected is close, however. It's really hairline. It's Nixon 49.1%, Senator Kennedy barely polling a majority at 50.9%. One point that struck me as I've read through and run through this great readout we have here is that Vice President Nixon is leading in 25 states, and Kennedy, who still seems to be the certain winner, is leading in 2 less states. He has 23 states. That story, of course, is that Vice President Nixon has taken a lot of states with the small electoral votes. Arizona 4, Colorado 6, Hawaii 3, Idaho 4, like that. And Senator Kennedy, of course, has piled up Massachusetts with 16, New Jersey 16, New York 45, Pennsylvania 32. That's where those 331-to-1 odds really come in the states which Senator Kennedy now has pretty safely in its bag, because the computer does not give a state either to Kennedy or to Nixon until there is at least an 80% probability of its going Democratic or going Republican. So the outcome of this election is quite certain this hour in the morning, but it is not official as yet. And of course, the RCA computer will be following through until it is official. Meanwhile, this is Richard Harkness with the RCA 501 computer in mid-Manhattan.
At 7:19 a.m. Eastern Time, Senator Kennedy was elected President of the United States. The NBC Victory Desk has just given California to Kennedy, and that gives him the election. That's Red Muller sticking up the V.
Now, here's the difference it makes on the electoral vote column, the all-important one. It gives Kennedy 296 electoral votes in our editorial judgment. He is still leading in states with a total of 41 electoral votes, headed toward a total of 337 for 192 to Vice President Nixon. The popular vote column, by the way, it's still very close. Senator Kennedy's lead is about, roughly 700,000, the way it's been the last 3 or 4 hours. And that is astonishing out of 60 million votes.
And while 60 million votes are being counted, you sometimes make mistakes. We did that morning when we gave the state of California to Kennedy. We goofed. Nixon won California. 6.5 million votes were cast in California. Nixon won it by 35,000. But California wasn't all the Republican candidate needed, as we shall see. I've been reporting on election nights for a lot of years, but the 1960 election kept us up later and made us work harder than any other. The story didn't end that night. The outcome was still unclear at breakfast time. In fact, it wasn't until after noon the next day when the final questions were answered. And that began with a news bulletin.
Now this portion of Player Hunch is brought to you by the Colgate-Palmolive Company, makers of new improved pink liquid.
Here is an election bulletin from NBC News. We switch to Herb Kaplow, NBC News, Los Angeles.
I have a copy of a telegram which has been sent to Senator John F. Kennedy at Hyannisport, Massachusetts. I'll read it through and then I'll have it available. I'll repeat it more slowly after we have, I've read the statement, and I'll also answer questions. The telegram reads as follows. I want to repeat through this wire, congratulations and best wishes I extended to you on television last night. I know that you will have the united support of all Americans as you lead the nation in the cause of peace and freedom during the next 4 years. Telegram is signed, Richard Nixon. The question was, has the Vice President expressed to me any explanation or analysis of the election? I think that the time to analyze it comes, a more scientific basis comes when you have the complete results from all the states. Two things that have pleased him especially, however, have been the fact that he has won a tremendous popular vote. And as you know, the margin of popular vote between the two candidates is less than 1%, and the Vice President's margin seems to be increasing as it goes along, so that it'll end up practically a dead heat, or perhaps the Vice President might even end ahead in the matter of popular vote. Naturally, this is a great satisfaction to him, and due to the fact that his was a national campaign carried to all 50 states. I might say just one thing further. You're asking about the Vice President. I've never personally seen a man who has taken something which meant a lot to him in quite such a wonderful grace. He's been someone I've admired for a long time, but I admired him more last night and this morning than I ever had before. He's in very good spirits. He's looked at this thing philosophically and analytically. I've heard him explaining how this works to his two daughters, and it's really been a privilege to watch.
And so ends a chapter in perhaps the final chapter in this 1960 presidential election. Herb Kaplow, NBC News, at the Ambassador Hotel press room in Los Angeles. Now to John Chancellor in New York.
So, the election as it stands now, really over. The only thing we're waiting for is Senator Kennedy. Now, this morning at about 11:05 a.m. Eastern Time, the President-elect, and this is a pool story we have from Hyannis, and pool reporters always write everything down in fear that their colleagues will trip them up, wearing a gray suit and a red tie, called on his father, Joseph, in his father's house at Hyannisport, Joseph Kennedy. Had a photographer, as he walked across the line, took Kennedy's picture. Kennedy advised him to wait, said, you'll get all the pictures you want later. It is that later that concerns us now. We're just simply not sure when the Secret Service will arrange, as it must, Senator Kennedy's appearance in the Armory at Hyannis. At 11:50 a.m., Kennedy received a half dozen photographers and reporters in a room, in the living room of his father's house, there on Cape Cod. He said he felt fine. He put aside all questions as to his situation until he heard from Nixon. And then, with his daughter Caroline, he walked out onto the broad lawn of his father's house there in Nantucket Sound and looked at the view. The Kennedy family, perhaps characteristically, all spent the morning in active pursuits. Kennedy's father went horseback riding. The sisters took hikes. There has not yet been any recorded instance of a game of touch football, but you must never rule that out with a family like the Kennedys. Now, for those of you who may just have joined us, we'd like again to look at the board and to do the popular vote. We now, for the first time, have a V, as we say, in front of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's name on the election board here. 32,275,184. We have been advised from the control room, and they're in contact with people in Hyannisport, that we're waiting for Mrs. Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy, to come out of the house, to be picked up by the president-elect, to be put into a motorcade and taken from that house at Hyannisport, which is now quite a famous structure in the United States, and has taken Cape Cod, an already busy tourist place, and made it something else again. A 5-minute drive, and there are troopers lining the route, about a 5-minute drive from the house to the armory, and that's what we're waiting for now. Now, I think possibly it might do us some good to have a look at Hyannisport to see what we will see when the next president of the United States comes out and appears on television for really the first time as the next president. Perhaps we could switch now to Hyannisport and have a look at what we may see. That's the back porch of Robert Kennedy's house. The Kennedy family, quite a large one, normally has several houses. You can see the back porch there of Bobby's house. Now we're panning to Joseph Kennedy's house, the former ambassador to the Court of St. James, man of considerable influence in this campaign, although we didn't hear much from him publicly. And this as far as we can tell, they're all inside this house, all the sisters, the wives, some of the children, and the president-elect conferring, having a family conference possibly in this house before they leave for the armory.
Here's how the election had come out. Voter turnout was high. In fact, turnout hasn't been that high in any presidential election since. More than 68 million votes were cast, and Kennedy won it by a margin of 114,000. Or to put it another way, Kennedy's margin of victory was less than 1%, the closest election since 1880. And after all these hours, the voters were still waiting for a look at the winner. We'll see him after this.
We are here in NBC election headquarters. Merrill Muller, myself, John Chancellor, waiting for President-elect Kennedy to go to the Hyannisport Armory and make a speech. We've been waiting now for about an hour, actually, an hour and 15 minutes since we first thought he would make this speech. We're told that the motors in his motorcade are revved up, that the people are waiting outside for the president-elect to appear and go there. In the meanwhile, Merrill Muller and I will try and find something interesting to say.
Have we been told where this motorcade is headed? Is this headed toward that big hall that Ray Scherer was telling us about?
That's right. The cameras and Ray Scherer are in the armory downtown, and the house, I think it's about 5 miles away from the armory. There are no facilities at the house for keeping people there. Now, Merrill, I believe what we've been waiting for is about to come true. You can see on your screen there the motorcade we've been discussing. Motorcade. The motorcade that will take President-elect. There it goes. There are the photographers in the car. There are some of the reporters, policemen, Secret Service men.
There's the white Lincoln right there.
There's the white Lincoln just behind the tree. There he is. There he is, the next president of the United States. He always sits in the front seat, and incidentally, so does Mr. Khrushchev. These people find that you can wave more easily from that point. That's Pierre Salinger in the car that just went by, the press secretary who has dogged Mr. Kennedy for this entire campaign. All closed cars, modest. They might be on their way to the supermarket, really, in that town.
It's quite a shopping spree.
It's quite a shopping spree. They've been shopping for all these days. And that, I believe, in the background there, that little strip of water you see, is Nantucket Sound. And now we're going to our reporter on the scene in Hyannisport, Massachusetts.
Here's President-elect Kennedy now, coming up to the Armory. Senator Kennedy sitting in the front seat, being helped out by Secret Service. Senator waiting until there's his wife, Jackie Kennedy. The president-elect is shaking hands with the crowd. Photographers yelling from the roof to get a picture. Senator Kennedy, his wife, and mother go into the Armory for his victory speech.
Here inside the Armory, the once very junior senator from Massachusetts, now at the age of 43, the President-elect of the United States, and his wife Jacqueline go strolling down the aisle, heading for the rostrum while he receives one of the rarest of tributes, a standing ovation from newsmen. A very, very unusual thing indeed. It should be noted, too, that there are local enthusiasts from Hyannis who have somehow made their way into this Armory, and they are contributing mightily to the applause. Kennedy, with his typical amazing physical ability to bounce back, looks rested. His eyes are a trifle bloodshot, but aside from that, you'd never guess that he's been through a grueling campaign and had been up most of the night following the election returns. We believe we're going to get a brief formal statement and then possibly answers to questions. The President-elect of the United States.
She's all right. She's all right, right here. Ladies and gentlemen,
I will ask.
ladies and gentlemen, I've received the following wire from Vice President Nixon. In that wire, he says, Senator John F. Kennedy, Hyannisport, Massachusetts. I want to repeat through this wire the congratulations and best wishes I extended to you on television last night. I know that you will have the united support of all Americans as you lead the nation in the cause of peace and freedom during the next 4 years. In reply to the Vice President, I sent him the following wire. Vice President Nixon, Los Angeles, California. Your sincere good wishes are gratefully accepted. You are to be congratulated on a fine race. I know that the nation can continue to count on your unswerving loyalty in whatever effort you undertake, and that you and I can maintain our long-standing cordial relations in the years ahead. Sincerely, John Kennedy. I received also a wire from President Eisenhower, which says, my congratulations to you for the victory you have just won at the polls. I will be sending you promptly a more comprehensive telegram suggesting certain measures that may commend themselves to you as you prepare to take over next January the responsibilities of the presidency, signed Dwight D. Eisenhower. And I have sent to President Eisenhower the following wire. I am grateful for your wire and good wishes. I look forward to working with you in the near future. The whole country is hopeful that your long experience in the service of your country can be drawn upon further in the years to come. With every good wish, signed, John Kennedy. Wait, Jackie, I guess we have one more statement.
And I can assure you that every degree of mind and spirit that I possess will be devoted to the long-range interests of the United States and to the cause of freedom around the world. So now my wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.